A marine biologist's boat breaks down in a storm. She has one option, an old, gruff Navy veteran who runs a weathered harbor. But when he helps her, something unexpected happens. By morning, a Navy vessel arrives at his dock, bringing secrets from the past. Hi everyone. Jack Sullivan was a 68-year-old former Navy senior chief who ran the same weathered harbor he'd bought after retiring 20 years ago. He wasn't one for small talk. Life at sea had turned him into a man of few words and practical solutions. His hands told the story of decades fixing things others would have abandoned. Sullivan liked his quiet life and saw no reason to change it. The Navy had been his whole world since he was 18. He'd served on destroyers and aircraft carriers, keeping engines running through storms and combat. But when retirement came, he couldn't imagine life away from the water. The small coastal harbor became his refuge, a place where he could work with his hands and avoid a world growing more confusing each year. Still, whenever a Navy ship passed by, that old sense of belonging never quite disappeared. When storms hit, Sullivan would be in his workshop while other businesses closed. He made sure local fishermen could get back on the water quickly. During his Navy years, he'd learned that coastal communities survive by helping each other, whether they admit it or not. Sullivan had no idea that fate was about to reconnect him with the military world he'd left behind. Everything changed one stormy afternoon in late September. The sky had darkened to gray. The waves were growing higher each minute. Sullivan was securing equipment before the weather worsened when he spotted it. A sleek yacht fighting the current, its engine making sounds that meant serious trouble. The yacht's engine coughed one final time, then died. Ellie Reynolds slumped against the wheel, frustrated beyond words. At 32, she'd already faced more setbacks in her marine biology career than most researchers see in a lifetime. The old yacht was her lifeline, carrying her research equipment, delivering samples, everything. Now it was useless driftwood in increasingly angry seas. She should have listened to her father, a retired Coast Guard officer who had begged her to upgrade. But grant money was tight, and every dollar went to research instead of boat repairs. As panic started to set in, she remembered something. Wasn't there a boatyard nearby? Some old-school place her father mentioned once, run by a crusty ex-Navy man who could fix anything that floats? Sullivan's harbor repairs came to mind. The rundown dock appeared through the mist like something from another time. Faded sign, boat parts piled outside. This wasn't a fancy marina with uniformed staff and cappuccino machines. This was salt and grit. She sighed. It wouldn't be cheap, but with the storm approaching fast, she had no choice. Drifting into the ramshackle harbor, she saw a hulking figure emerge from the shadows, squinting at the darkening sky. He was older, face lined from years of sea and sun. A faded Navy tattoo peeked from his rolled-up sleeve. He didn't smile, just grunted, "Problem?" Ellie took a breath. This wasn't some customer service rep she could charm. This guy looked like he chewed nails for breakfast. "My boat won't start," she said, feeling like a child again, facing her father's disappointment. Sullivan didn't waste time on pleasantries. He walked toward the yacht with the determination of a combat medic approaching a wounded sailor. Ellie followed, hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. Engines weren't her world. Her life was marine ecosystems, coral reefs, collecting samples, as far from mechanical work as you could get. "Open the engine compartment," Sullivan barked. Fumbling with the hatch, Ellie blushed. The compartment opened with a groan, showing the salt-crusted engine. Sullivan leaned in, hands disappearing into wires and hoses. Each grunt made Ellie more anxious. What Sullivan discovered would either save her research mission or sink it completely. But the old Navy man couldn't know that by tomorrow, his quiet life would be turned upside down by people he thought he'd left behind decades ago. After what seemed like forever, Sullivan emerged frowning. Fuel pumps shot. Electrical systems got salt damage too. Ellie's heart sank. Boat repairs would drain her limited grant money. Before she could ask, Sullivan was listing parts and costs, overwhelming her completely. "Best I can do is get you running, but this boat's seen better days," he said, as raindrops began hitting the dock. Better days. The phrase echoed in her mind. Those were in short supply. Funding cuts, skeptical department heads, equipment failures, bills piling up. All of it crashed down on her at once. Sullivan must have noticed something in her expression. "Look," he said, softer than before, "it ain't my place to pry, but you seem overwhelmed." Ellie usually hid behind a smile and can-do attitude, but Sullivan, with those salt-stained eyes that had seen real hardship, saw right through her. Tears threatened to spill over. "It's just everything," she said, gesturing helplessly. The boat was just the last straw. To her surprise, Sullivan didn't look annoyed. He leaned against the boat, arms crossed as rain fell around them. "Sometimes things pile up like barnacles on an old hull," he said. "Can't fix everything at once. Start with the basics." His words hit her hard, not sympathy, but practical wisdom that matched her own stubborn nature. Suddenly, her problem seemed less crushing. Maybe she couldn't fix everything, but she could fix this boat. "So, what are the basics? Where do we start?" Sullivan's mouth twitched slightly. "First, we get inside before the storm drowns us. Then we see what we can salvage." As they hurried toward the workshop, neither could have imagined how this chance meeting would connect to the highest levels of naval operations. By tomorrow, Sullivan's quiet harbor would become the center of attention for people he'd spent 20 years avoiding. For the next 2 hours, they worked through the storm. Ellie became Sullivan's assistant, holding flashlights, fetching tools, learning more about engines than she'd ever thought possible. They developed a rhythm, Sullivan diagnosing, Ellie fixing. Each clang and click meant progress. The work cleared her head. Her research worries faded as she focused on the task at hand. For once, her PhD didn't matter. This was about practical solutions, and it felt surprisingly good. Between repairs, they talked. Sullivan wasn't just a grumpy mechanic after all. He complained about modern boat designs and computerized systems that couldn't be fixed with basic tools. He mentioned Navy missions that had taken him across the world. 26 years, 7 ships, chief petty officer on the last 3. Engine room was my domain. His shoulders straightened slightly, revealing the pride he still carried. Ellie shared her own struggles, research that barely covered student loans, dreams of coral reef conservation, fighting to be taken seriously in a field dominated by older men with secure funding. Coral reefs? Never understood them myself, Sullivan said, but respect showed in his eyes when she described her work. He might live with engines and fiberglass, but he recognized dedication when he saw it. As the storm eased, they finished the emergency repair. The new fuel pump brought the engine roaring back to life. Ellie couldn't help smiling. Sullivan barely acknowledged their success. Should get you where you need to go for now. The bill was surprisingly reasonable given the circumstances. As she prepared to leave, Ellie found herself reluctant to go. She'd expected a quick fix and a gruff send-off. Instead, she'd found something she didn't know she needed: honest advice and a reminder of her own strength. What about the other stuff? The electrical system and everything else? Sullivan wiped his hands on a rag. One thing at a time. Come back next week and we'll check it out. He paused. Truth is, I'm not exactly busy, and you're not bad with a wrench. For a scientist. From Sullivan, that was high praise. Ellie felt warmth spread through her chest. Next week? I can do that. Should I bring coffee? Sullivan almost smiled. Better be strong. None of that fancy Italian stuff. Ellie left feeling lighter. Her problems, grants, bills, research, were still there, but they didn't seem impossible anymore. She'd fixed more than her boat today. She'd found something strong inside herself and made a connection with the grumpiest mechanic on the coast. She might not have a big research budget, but she had a direction now. What she didn't know was that her name had already appeared in a secure military database. An automated system had flagged her presence at the old naval mechanics location. By morning, events would be in motion that would change both their lives forever. 1 week became 2, then 3. Tuesdays at Sullivan's became part of Ellie's routine, a welcome break from her hectic schedule. She'd stop by after collecting samples, bringing takeout and coffee strong enough to remove paint. The radio played old Navy songs that Sullivan pretended to hate, but hummed when he thought she wasn't listening. They made a good team. Ellie's sharp eyes caught things even Sullivan missed sometimes. He'd never admit it, but she saw his respect when she solved problems that stumped him. Ellie learned quickly. figuring out how to diagnose engine problems just by listening. Her yacht improved under their care. It wasn't perfect, still showing its age, but it was reliable now. That was like Ellie herself, a bit messy, still finding her way, but getting stronger each day. Then one afternoon, as rain clouds gathered again, they heard an expensive engine, too smooth and powerful for this humble harbor. A man in an expensive suit stood on the dock next to a gleaming yacht that looked ridiculous among the working boats. Sullivan emerged, his usual scowl darker than usual. "Ryan Parker," he said, like it was a curse. Ellie slid out from under the engine she was working on, suddenly aware of how she must look. Greasy overalls, messy hair, oil-streaked face. Ryan Parker was Sullivan's enemy, a developer who owned marinas up and down the coast. He wanted to bulldoze Sullivan's harbor and build a luxury yacht club. Sullivan had refused to sell for years, and Parker's offers kept rising as neighboring properties developed. "Reconsidered my offer, Jack?" Parker asked with fake friendliness. "The neighborhood's changing. This," he waved at the weathered buildings, "is the past. My development is the future." Sullivan's no was firm and final. Parker looked Ellie up and down with obvious disdain. "I see you've got a helper now," he said with a condescending smile. "Things must be really desperate, Sullivan." His words stung, not because they were true, but because he couldn't see what they'd built. Ellie stood straight, channeling her father's military bearing. "I'm lending a hand," she said clearly, "and I'm good with boats." Parker's fake smile vanished as Sullivan looked at Ellie with unmistakable pride. Right then, surrounded by tools and boats, Ellie knew she belonged here, regardless of what people like Parker thought. After Parker left, his promises of life-changing money echoing in the old boathouse, Sullivan muttered about developers destroying tradition for profit. Ellie saw the weariness in his eyes and felt protective of this stubborn old sailor. "You okay?" Sullivan shrugged. "Don't like change. Used to be you fixed a boat, charged a fair price, and people got what they paid for." He gestured toward the fancy marinas visible in the distance, offering convenience without substance. "You do good work," Ellie said firmly. "They might be flashy, but they don't know boats like you do." Sullivan studied her for a long moment. "Kid, sometimes I forget you've got a good head on your shoulders for someone who likes coral." Coming from Sullivan, it was the highest possible praise. Neither suspected that Parker's visit had triggered something unexpected. His company's background check on Sullivan's property had flagged classified naval records, something about to bring Sullivan's past crashing into his present. They spent the afternoon rebuilding a water pump in comfortable silence. Before leaving, Ellie made a decision that would change everything. The next week, while Sullivan worked on a sailboat, Ellie approached with a worn notebook full of sketches. "Got an idea," she said, showing him designs she'd worked on late into the night. It was her marine conservation dream, transformed. The plans showed a floating research platform with a repair dock, combining sample collection with boat repairs. She'd found salvaged materials they could use with some creativity and hard work. Sullivan looked from the sketches to Ellie. "What the hell is this?" "A research station on water," she said with determination. "More than that, boaters' assistance with environmental research, oil changes, quick fixes, and marine surveys after the boat's fixed, for people who care about both practical needs and making the world better." Sullivan's face transformed with a slow grin, surprising as calm after a hurricane. "That might just be crazy enough to work." Before he could say more, a powerful engine sound interrupted them. Not Parker's yacht, but something bigger and more purposeful. They turned toward the harbor entrance. A Navy vessel was approaching, sleek, gray, official. Officers in uniform stood at attention on deck. "Sullivan," Ellie said, "are you expecting visitors?" The old mechanic went pale, his expression unreadable. "No, I am not." The Navy vessel docked perfectly alongside Sullivan's weathered pier. The contrast was striking, military precision meeting decades of civilian wear. Sullivan's entire demeanor changed. Despite his age, he stood straighter, shoulders back, chin up, a military man facing authority again. "Stay here," he told Ellie, "but just stay here." He walked toward the dock with measured steps. 3 officers disembarked. The leader, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair, wore a captain's insignia. Her eyes took in everything before focusing on Sullivan. "Chief Sullivan," she called. Not Jack, not Mr. Sullivan, Chief Sullivan. "It's been a long time." Sullivan stopped. "Captain Harris, 20 years and 4 months to be exact." Captain Harris smiled slightly, still precise as ever. She gestured to the officers behind her. "You remember Commander Ramirez and Lieutenant Commander Chen?" Sullivan nodded stiffly. "Coronado Operation Briefing Team." Ellie watched, confused. Sullivan had never mentioned specific missions or people he'd served with. What was Coronado? Why were high-ranking officers tracking him down after 20 years? Captain Harris spotted Ellie in the workshop doorway. "Dr. Eleanor Reynolds, I presume? Marine biologist specializing in coral reef ecosystems under climate stress?" Sullivan's head snapped around, clearly shocked that they knew who Ellie was. Ellie stepped forward, wiping her hands on her overalls. "Yes, that's me. But how do you—" "We should talk inside," Captain Harris interrupted. "All of us. This isn't for open air." Inside Sullivan's office, Captain Harris placed a tablet on the desk. "We need your expertise, Chief Sullivan. Both of you." She showed them a satellite image of an underwater structure. "Those look like artificial reefs," Ellie said, "but unlike any I've ever seen." "They're not standard artificial reefs," Captain Harris confirmed. "They're remnants of Project Poseidon." Sullivan went pale. Project Poseidon was decommissioned in 2002. Everything was removed according to protocol. "That's what we thought too," Lieutenant Commander Chen said, "until Dr. Reynolds' research drone found this last month." "My drone? I was just mapping reef formations. There was nothing unusual in my data." "Your drone's secondary sensors detected an energy signature. When you uploaded the data to your university server, our monitoring system flagged it." The truth came out piece by piece. Project Poseidon was a classified network of underwater monitoring stations, tracking submarine movements along the coast. And Sullivan wasn't just a mechanic. He was one of the lead designers and maintenance specialists for the entire system. They needed both Sullivan's technical knowledge and Ellie's expertise on the ecosystem to safely decommission a forgotten underwater station before its power core could damage the environment, or before Parker's dredging operations accidentally exposed it. "So you need us to locate this station and safely decommission it," Ellie said, trying to process this unexpected turn. "Yes," Captain Harris confirmed, "immediately." Sullivan looked up from the satellite image. "I'll need complete schematics and diving equipment rated for 100 meters. "Already on our vessel," Commander Ramirez said, "with a technical team awaiting your instructions." Sullivan turned to Ellie. "This should be your choice too. This isn't boat repair anymore. This is classified naval operations. Dangerous ones." Ellie thought about her research, the reefs she'd dedicated her career to protecting, and Sullivan, who taught her more about resilience in weeks than years of academia had. "I'm in. When do we start?" What happened over the next 2 weeks became local legend, though few knew the full story. The official version mentioned only environmental research and mapping. The reality, midnight dives, unstable technology, and Sullivan's ability to remember complex systems he'd designed decades earlier, remained classified. But some things couldn't be hidden. Sullivan's renewed connection with the Navy, Ellie's revolutionary coral preservation techniques, and the transformation of Sullivan's harbor. When they returned, Sullivan found new floating docks replacing his dilapidated pier. His workshop had been upgraded, same appearance outside, modern equipment inside. And in the corner of the harbor sat a research vessel with Reynolds Sullivan Marine Conservation painted on its hull. "Captain Harris pulled some strings," Commander Ramirez explained, "compensation for continued consultation services." Sullivan touched the new dock. "I didn't ask for this." "No," Ellie said, standing beside him, "but we earned it." In the months that followed, Sullivan's harbor became something neither could have imagined when Ellie's broken yacht first drifted in. Part boat repair shop, part research station, it served both practical needs and scientific research. Sullivan still complained about new technology, but now while using state-of-the-art equipment. Ellie still talked about coral, but now while helping fishermen install sustainable gear. When Ryan Parker returned with government officials he thought would force Sullivan to sell, he found not just a stubborn mechanic, but a Navy-backed research facility with protected status. "Times are changing, Parker," Sullivan said with the hint of a smile, "just not how you planned." The floating research platform Ellie sketched became reality, expanded with Navy engineering but true to her vision. One evening, Captain Harris visited unofficially. She found Sullivan and Ellie arguing companionably over an underwater camera design. "Quite the operation you've built," Harris observed. "Not what I expected for retirement," Sullivan admitted. "It's better," Ellie added. "We're doing more good together than either of us could alone." Captain Harris nodded. "Sometimes the best missions are the ones you don't plan." She raised her coffee cup. "Two unexpected partnerships." 6 months later, a young marine biology student stepped off the bus at the small coastal town. She'd heard about the Reynolds Sullivan Marine Conservation Center and had come to apply for an internship. Making her way down to the harbor, she was surprised to find not the sleek research facility she expected, but something that looked more like an old-fashioned boatyard with modern equipment tucked into every corner. An older man with weathered features was arguing with a woman in a wetsuit about the best way to modify a research vessel's engine for more efficient operation. "Excuse me," the student said hesitantly. "I'm looking for Dr. Reynolds?" The woman turned, her face lighting up. "That's me. You must be the new intern." "Yes, You're late," the older man growled. "Boat's waiting." "You any good with a wrench?" I'm studying marine biology," the student stammered. The woman, Dr. Reynolds, laughed. "Don't mind Sullivan. That's his way of saying welcome. And don't worry, I couldn't tell a socket wrench from a screwdriver when I first came here either." "But you'll learn," Sullivan said, not unkindly. "Can't study what's in the ocean if you can't get to it. Boat engine dies. All your fancy degrees won't help you." As the intern followed them toward a research vessel, she noticed something unusual. Local fishermen waved respectfully to Sullivan. Navy personnel in civilian clothes nodded to him as they passed. And the equipment, some of it looked military grade, definitely not standard for a small marine research station. "What exactly is this place?" she asked Dr. Reynolds quietly. Ellie smiled. "It's what happens when an old Navy mechanic and a marine biologist decide the ocean needs both of them. You'll see." Sullivan's Harbor wasn't in any textbook or official research directory, but among naval engineers and marine biologists alike, it had become famous as the place where practical knowledge and scientific theory worked side by side, each making the other stronger. For a grumpy old Navy mechanic and a determined young marine biologist, the journey had only just begun. But this time, neither one was navigating alone, and that made all the difference.
Love this story? Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.